the Sound Designers Podcast. Here are your hosts, Timothy and Renee.
Hello and welcome to Tonebenders. Renee and Timothy are not here this episode. I am the new Tonebenders robotic assistant. My name is 85T4X, and I will be your robot host. I will not stutter or stammer like the usual hosts. You're welcome. Today marks 5 years since the first Tonebenders podcast was released. So to celebrate, I gave both Renee and Timothy the day off. They are simple humans and need rest. Robots do not. To mark the 5th anniversary of the podcast, this episode will be a walk down memory lane. We are going to hear some clips from some of humanity's favorite past Tonebenders episodes. Some of these clips made humans laugh. Some of them made humans rethink their workflow. And some of them humans found to be inspirational. We will hear from a Foley artist, location recordist, sound designers, sound supervisors, a director, and also a few re-recording engineers. None of them will say anything 85T4X did not already know. We robots are far more efficient at audio than so-called thoughtful humans. Okay, let's play some clips of humans talking about audio. First up will be Dave Whitehead from episode number 27. In this clip he talks about how he made the sounds in the film Elysium, and where he finds inspiration for new sounds.
One of the most fun sounds was actually the sound of the Raven, which was one of the spaceships that Kruger comes down in, and it was sort of a military vehicle. And it was a vibrator shoved into a dobro guitar. And I bought it for the purpose of putting into the guitar. I'll also add
sure
there.
You did.
Yeah.
Sure you did.
And it was actually funny putting that on just taking it to my accountant and saying why I'm claiming for a vibrator. But anyway, so that was cool, just sort of swinging the vibrator, the dobro around my head, getting real physical sound rather than, it was just a really cool way of getting source material for the spaceships. And yeah, we shoved that vibrator in all sorts of metal. It was good.
I'm glad you ended that sentence the way you did.
Yeah, I put the metal there. But, it's just the whole thing of just experimenting in unusual places with unusual things. And yeah, it's fun. There are so many resources for sound designers nowadays to sort of get tips and tricks. There's so much information out there on how to do sound design for things. I find it quite interesting. And it's sort of like, I think people need to sometimes just use their imaginations. You don't need to look for how to do something. Just try and use your brain to try and come up with your own idea as to how it's going to happen. You don't need to look online and there's no wrong or right way. And that's the biggest thing ever is most of the sounds that I love are mistakes. Well, things that have happened through some happy accident. And, happy accidents are good things.
So your message is for people to just grab the dildo and put it in things?
Yeah, that's exactly it, yeah.
You had that queued up.
Do things that with the EQ that you shouldn't do, just torture the plugins. Use your mics horribly, put them in places where they're in danger. Because that's why you bought the damn microphone.
In episode 23, Andy Malcolm took Timothy on a tour of his Footsteps Foley studios. Here he talks about different genres need different Foley.
There's different types of Foley, the way I see it. There's drama, where you're trying to make the Foley transparent. And then there's animation, which is the other end of the spectrum, which allows a Foley artist to kind of go off the deep end and come up with, all kinds of sounds for, various situations and various types of animated films. And then comedy kind of falls somewhere in the middle, because you're trying to make it transparent, but at the same time you get to exaggerate sounds. So on a film like Austin Powers or you know, some of the Bridesmaids, those kinds of films where the action is exaggerated, we exaggerate the Foley too and kind of have more fun with it. People say, oh, what's the hardest sound you've ever had to do? I get that question a lot, and it's not so much what's a hard sound to do, because you just kind of start and you build a sound, and that's the fun and creative part about Foley. The hard thing to do in Foley are little, if somebody's writing, you know, you have to cross your T's and dot your I's, and if it's not, if it's scribbling, if the Foley artist kind of scribbles over writing, it's never going to work. You really have to be detailed, and keyboards and typing and things like that. Like a punch, for example, you can see a punch coming, but typing, it's just, you know, you gotta really focus on each individual key. I know it sounds a bit weird, but that's the hardest thing to do in Foley.
Bob Hine talked to us about working with Wes Anderson on Royal Tenenbaums in episode 59.
Wes was great. Wes knew exactly what he wanted, and he asked for the whole universe. Wes wants everything imaginable at the mixing stage. And a lot of it he doesn't keep, but he knows what he wants to try. So he has a gigantic imagination, as we all know. And it was, for sound, it was creating things from imaginary places and creating different colors that you didn't necessarily expect to feel. That film was so good that we had a preview for that film, and it scored so high that they didn't edit one frame of the picture after the preview. It just worked. It was just one of those movies that everything about it just felt right. He would spend all day with us at the mix. We'd listen to everything and decide yay or nay, you know, because there was a lot. And it's actually a simple film, and it didn't call for a lot of sound. So we chose carefully what to keep in it. All I know is we had a really good time, and everybody knew we were working on a really good film. So everyone was charged up about it.
Will Files was our guest in episode 22, and he told us about working on the very first Atmos mix ever done.
I was very lucky to have done the very first Atmos mix. Brave was the very first Atmos mix, and it was kind of a big experiment. I mean, we'd done a few clips. We had remixed a clip from The Incredibles, which I wish we could play for the world because it turned out really, really cool. But anyway, you know, doing the very first one was really exciting because it was this big, it was like casting off the shackles, you know? It's like suddenly you could literally put a sound anywhere you wanted in the room. And there's a learning curve there too, because you can put a sound anywhere in the room doesn't necessarily mean that you should always put every sound everywhere in the room. We went a little too far at first on purpose. We sort of said, okay, let's break it. Let's say, like, what if we just go for it and make it nuts? And we spent a couple weeks doing that. And then we played it all back, you know, where we played the whole film. We said, oh God, this really doesn't feel like the movie anymore. This kind of feels like a ride. And it's like any tool, you know, once you sort of, you know, can paint with every single color, you have to be more choosy about what colors you use, and so it doesn't just end up like a big, you know, mess. I think of Atmos versus 7.1 and 5.1 in terms of, it's almost like HD versus standard def. It's really like, I almost think of it more like resolution. You can approximate it in 7.1. You can approximate that feeling of something moving through the room or even all the way around the room. You can sort of approximate the sound of something going over your head. But when you do an actual A-B between Atmos and 7.1, or especially 5.1, it becomes very apparent that you're just not getting that detail anymore. And detail's a big part of it too. It's like, because you're able to spread things out in the room more, you're actually able to hear more of the mix. We did a demo for Spielberg, and his first comment was, wow, the dialogue is so clear. And the reason for that is that we moved the music off the screen just a little bit, maybe 20% off, just to the first row of surrounds right off the screen. And we moved some of the sound effects around as well. And what it does is it leaves more space in the mix behind the screen. And so suddenly you can pick things out of the mix more.
Martin Pinoso talked about his workflows for films with tight budgets in episode 14.
We mixed at Technicolor for the finish, but we actually did all the premixes in homes too. Because there was some really big restrictions in the budget for that film, and really we had to find a way to make it possible. So the re-recording mixers, they did their premixes from home. So we ended up being in Technicolor for about 8 days, something like that. Overall, and finalizing the film altogether. We didn't print the premixes. We just played it. We continued mixing basically at Technicolor with the sessions that evolved in the process. Every project has its own kind of restrictions and delays and schedule, and I think working remotely is just one other solution that can be applied in the situation. It's a lot. It's less stress in a way to work from home. It's just more like a partnership now.
In episode 55, Nia Hansen talks about working with iconic sounds in the Marvel superhero films.
Yeah, that's a really fun aspect of these superhero movies is a lot of times you have these legacy sounds that people know, they recognize, so you got to match it, but either come up with more material because you're limited in your palette, or it's doing something new now or interacting with another superpower, so you have to kind of make a combo effect. On the Captain America movies, we had some SHIELD sounds from the original. And that kind of has that, what's now sort of iconic metal clang, the vibranium sound. So we made sure to bring some of that in. And we also tried to replicate it with our own recordings and sound design, which is tough, especially because you think to record really thick, solid, heavy metal, but sometimes the denser the metal, it just makes a little tink sound. It doesn't make a huge sound that you expect. And we had the same problem with Thor 2, The Dark World, doing Thor's hammer. Again, a big piece of metal that if you record that, it doesn't really sound like you think it does. So we made a lot of new recordings and tried to get close to that original sound, but also layering in that original sound here and there.
Carl Anderson appeared in episode 12 and talked about where he gets satisfaction from after a film wraps.
First of all, I've never considered myself a sound designer. I know guys who are sound designers, and they are so much smarter than me. I really consider myself to be quite an idiot. Craig Hennigan is a really smart guy. I'm not as smart as Craig. I will always sort of consider myself a supervising sound editor, and I have started in the last 2 years to maybe the last year to really be able to hear dialogue well, to be able to mix dialogue. I'm starting to get to where I think I can mix dialogue as well as I think I can hear it in my own head. So I am the last person who would insist on a credit in any way, shape, or form. I have a pretty good idea of what I do on every film. I have a pretty good idea of how important I am to the film, and I don't need a little bit of text at the end of the movie to tell me that. I used to work for Sidney Lumet, and Sidney used to say, "Your credit is your paycheck," and frankly, that kind of rings true for me. I mean, there is nothing fancy attached to a couple of lines of text at the end of a movie. But there's a lot fancy attached to a director saying to my face, "Thank you very much," and calling me on the next one. I don't worry too much. I mean, Robert gave me a sound design credit at the head of Pandora's Promise, and I was embarrassed.
Carlo Guillermo Proto talks about why sound people are so important to him in his role as a film director in episode 57.
That's one of the things that I learned about the most is pacing and timing. And I mean, your sound guy's like your bass player. Like he just keeps the rhythm down and he just sets the tone. And a good sound person is not just a great technician. They're like, you know, pop psychologists. They're mediators. They work with different like personalities. Like a great technical sound person is a dime a dozen. It's all about the personality, and that's how people get rehired. And it's the collaboration, and it's like how they're sort of like willing to work, and it's that chemistry. And a lot of that is attributed to Pablo. Like, this sounds horrible. Yes, I am the director, but because it's such a collaborative process, but I will allow him to stop and to just be like, hold on, I got to reposition a mic.
Yeah.
And those are just some of the things that I think like some directors are just really, in Spanish you say maniático. What, like just like really maniacal, I guess. Yeah. Or just like really, you know, just unwilling and not willing to do that, to stop a scene for a lav. And I think like that's just, you know, that to me it was just as much as like if my lens fogged up, you know, like you can't see anything, my lens is fogged up, I have to clean it, we have to stop. It's the same idea.
Thank you for saying this.
Yeah. No, and that's the reason why I was so like stoked to do this, is because you just don't have the opportunity to talk about this stuff. Everybody wants to talk about the photography, everybody wants to talk about the story and the family and the emotion and all that stuff. But we spent 8 months on the film doing the sound, from Foley to sound design to mixing. Really, it was like an intense labor of love.
Eric Adal told us about the sound design of the film Argo from episode 35.
You know, so we kind of took that approach. We're telling this story and creating this emotional experience through the sound, and it's not just cut, 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 cut. Here's something, you know, little punctuation marks here and there. It's like instead it's one big wave that takes you through, you know, many minutes of story. And for the tension of the film, it was kind of a dream. You know, we could take, you know, we did a lot of recording and got a lot of native Farsi speaking extras out to start creating the tapestries of kind of wallas and crowd chants and you know, obviously the opening sequence, the crowds and the chants are, you know, the big player. But also later in the film, as our characters are going through the Mirabad airport and trying to get on their Swiss Air flight to get out of there, we just have these long scenes where they're just waiting. For us, we could just, you know, we could take the crowd sounds, the din, the massive humanity, and then just instead of just over like 5 feet of film, over like 200 feet of film, just start slowly sucking it out. You know, sucking the sound out and muting it. So now we're going internal, but it's so slow that you don't notice it, or an audience doesn't know that they're being manipulated in that way. And then you just kind of like, you start to hear yourself breathe because the rug has slowly been getting pulled out from under you until you're silent. And then boom, the passport stamp snaps you back into reality and everything's going again.
Oh yeah, I've got a letter from the Ministry of Culture. Yeah.
I love that experience of having long arcs, and you know, that's also something that the re-recording mixers, Greg Rudolph and John Reitz, completely embraced that, and that's, I'm using the word arc, but it was Greg Rudolph who, when we finished that film, he's like, man, these are like such nice long arcs. So I got to give him credit for that term.
For the film Mad Max Fury Road, Oliver Machin was hired to record all the crazy vehicles featured in the film before they were destroyed on set. In episode 34 he told us how he did it.
Because my recording location, I had spent a lot of time, first of all, trying to find somewhere
that had long enough straights so I could run a vehicle at 40, 50 miles an hour continuously and get 1 minute of recording without it having to slow down, turn around and come back again. And also then didn't have speed humps in the way, and also then didn't have telegraph wires going over the top. For example, trying to bring in the people eater. It's not as big as the Duff wagon, but it's still a tall truck. I've got to make sure I can drive it in somewhere, and also turn it around to do runs back and forth. And that in itself, just the physical logistics of recording vehicles that size that aren't on a test track or an airfield, which you'd kind of normally do this kind of thing, is what I did before, just means everything is incredibly slow. That people eater has got 2 trailers on it, as you said, and there's the prime mover at the front. Trying to turn that around, takes a good 10 minutes in itself before you then even think about running it back, and then they go, oh, the driver misunderstood. You didn't want me to do that. Okay, let's do that setup again. So it took a very long amount of time. Oh, the bikes, actually, they became quite I had to basically build my own homemade dyno rig to try and record the bikes, which went through several different permutations with a lot of help from the bike fabrication guys. And we ended up taking the bikes and strapping them onto the tail lift of the unit truck, then mounting, so the front wheel was wedged up against the back of the truck and strapped down, and the back drive wheel is then on some rolling wheels to try and record those bikes as much as possible with the engines under load, because we noticed that if you just sit on the bike and rev the engine, it doesn't really sound, it's very high end and it's not very interesting sounding. The moment you put a rider on it, it was great. So we were like, well, okay, try and put a 788 in the backpack, but then I've got issues. I'm not going to get the file metadata input correctly, and being strict about starting and stopping for different setups. And it's kind of dangerous. What if the rider falls off and he's got all these cables coming out the back and something? So we kind of built this rig on the back of the trailer, and furiously we would be spraying water on the wheels, trying to keep the temperature down of the rubber on rubber, and also spraying onto the engine. Again, there's no air running across the engine. And then we started getting fans from the special effects department, the kind of silent so-called fans, to blow onto the engine at the same time. So that, every time you thought recording a vehicle or something should be quick, you would find a very good reason why it was never going to be, and it would take a lot of thinking around how you're going to solve that problem with the facilities that you had available. And again, the mechanics and all those guys were great. They put aside a lot of extra time. They had enough, hard enough work schedule as it was, trying to keep the vehicles that they were putting on camera running without worrying about me coming around and then saying, right, can we do this for this day, and take up your time, because suddenly the night before they found out that some stuntman had broken a vehicle, and actually they'd been up all night trying to fix it, and now I've come to them in the morning saying, right, now I need to take all your time doing this. So it was a good team effort, and it really was important and great that they were so invested in it. And that's kind of what made it fun to do. I was trying to do justice to their work, because a lot of these guys have become very attached to their vehicles and would kind of become their children, and they weren't going to see them again. So they were keen that we recorded them and did justice to their creations.
In episode 21, Ann Krober told us a great story about how Alan Split accidentally became the star of the Academy Awards ceremony when he won an Oscar for Black Stallion.
Alan, he passed away about 19 years ago now. There was 3 people, Walter Murch, Ben Bird, and Alan, that really changed sound for movies. And Alan had his own style, as the other 2 guys did. He was an incredible artist. I mean, he was also very intuitive, and it was amazing working with him. We were like 2 kids in a sandbox sometimes. Alan got this incredible notoriety. When he got the Oscar for The Black Stallion, we knew ahead of time because it was a Special Achievement Award. And Alan decided that he wouldn't go to Hollywood to get the Oscar. So the night of the Academy Awards, if Alan had gone, he would have just gone, said a little bit and left, But what happened is that Johnny Carson was the host that night.
Before the presentation of the next award, which is in the category of sound, I'd like to tell you that the Board of Governors has voted a Special Achievement Award for sound effects editing of The Black Stallion to Mr. Alan Splett.
And he made a running gag about Alan the whole night long, where he would come out and he'd say, "Ladies and gentlemen, Alan Splett, who's going to be getting the Special Achievement Award for sound, is a little bit late. He made a wrong turn on the Ventura Freeway. He just called and he's coming pretty soon."
Ladies and gentlemen, we just heard from Alan Splett. He missed the off-ramp at the Civic Center, and he's somewhere in Ensenada, but he's on his way here. Our next presenter is a child
and then
of Hollywood.
there'd be another update. Alan Splett just stopped off to pick up, this actor that was sick. He's coming pretty soon.
It is not Melvin Douglas's fault he's not here tonight. He was in a carpool with Alan Splett.
And then he'd say, Alan Splett had a problem with a flat tire. They're fixing it right now, but he's going to be here. So there'd be these Alan Splett, he's coming. Until the very end, after the whole show was over, Johnny Carson comes back and he says, "Ladies and gentlemen, first it was George C. Scott, and then Marlon Brando, and now Alan Splett has stood us up at the Oscars."
It always happens. First George C. Scott doesn't show, then Marlon Brando, and now Alan Splett.
And oh my God, the amount of publicity he got for that was just unbelievable. Alan had this amazing ability. He'd run away from publicity and it would chase after him with more speed and ferocity.
If you missed any of these the first time around, you can find the full pods on our site, tonebenderspodcast.com, or on our SoundCloud feed. Renee and Timothy have asked me to thank all of the listeners for staying with them for these past 5 years. They have enjoyed interacting with many of you and are looking forward to many more years of podcasting. Please feel free to reach out to them on Twitter or Facebook to let them know what your favorite episodes were. And please tell your fellow sound-related friends and colleagues about the show. Humans like to listen to recommendations from other humans. Thanks for listening. Renee and Timothy have a lot of great episodes coming your way soon. Keep on rocking in the free world. 85T4X out.
Thanks for listening to Tonebenders. You can find us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Stitcher. If you listen on iTunes or Stitcher, please write us a review while you're there. To support the show, go to tonebenderspodcast.com and click through our Amazon link or leave us a tip. You can also download and listen to our entire show archive there and leave a comment on our site or on SoundCloud. Keep up to date by following at the Tonebenders on Twitter or find Tonebenders Podcast on Facebook and YouTube. Email us with your questions and ideas at info@tonebenderspodcast.com.